you hit the nail on the head with one of the most underappreciated parts of all of this. And I think that when I'm thinking of key reasons that lead to resistance to adopting new processes or technology, there's kind of two big buckets of key reasons.
Hello and welcome everyone to this latest episode of the Auto Tech Show. My name is Marc Babin, and as always, it's great to welcome you to the show today. Now today we are headed back to the world of fleet management, looking at how the latest innovations in AI are transforming a world of spreadsheets to smarter, more informed decisions for operators. And our guest for this talk is right on the front line of the topic. As a leader in the product team at Fleetio, Chuck Drews is on the front line of new AI product development when it comes to fleet software solutions. He has personally seen the direct impact this transformation has had on fleet operators, and his insights today will hopefully inspire many of you to look at AI a little differently when it comes to your business and processes. Chuck, it's great to have you today. Thank you so much for being on the show. Really looking forward to your insights. Before we jump in, just for some context for the audience, can you give us a small taste of the role that Fleetio plays in the fleet management space?
Yeah, sure thing. And thanks for having me, Mark.
Absolutely.
When I think of where Fleetio plays a role in the fleet space, there's really, I think, three pillars that come to mind, which are tracking, execution, and then optimization. On the tracking side of the house, think of all of your assets, their preventive maintenance and inspection schedules, all your personnel involved with fleet operations, parts and inventory, any of your integrated services like fuel cards or telematics devices or what have you. Any of the things that are happening when you're using those resources, like work orders or creating issues for unplanned events, all that consolidated into one single source of truth. So you can track everything that's happening. And ultimately, tracking is useless if you're not going to do something with the information. I think that's where the pillar of execution comes into play. And Fleetio really plays a digital role in executing a fleet ops for, I think, a couple different ways. You're executing on the preventive maintenance by creating work orders or resolving those service reminders. You're submitting inspection forms based on their schedules. You're, again, creating issues for unplanned events that happen along the way. And with all of your personnel in the system, Fleetio really makes fleet operations a collaborative team sport. Whether it's folks in the field using our mobile app or the folks in the front office using the desktop. So you're tracking all the information you need to relative to your fleet operations. You're executing on it more effectively, and then just because you're doing it and you're executing doesn't mean you're particularly any good at it. So I think that's where the optimization pillar comes into play. We have a suite of reporting and advanced analytics offerings, and I think all of these assets and personnel and maintenance events, inspections, all the things that are happening, they're producing a lot of really great and useful data. Yeah. And I think Fleetio just helps to harness the power of all of that data using that myriad of reports and dashboards. So I kind of view it like a dinner recipe. We're going to help you track all the raw ingredients you need to cook it. We're going to help you find ways to make your recipe taste better on the next pass is kind of how I think about Fleetio.
Really nice preview to the episode there. And I know we're going to touch a lot of those topics that you just sort of touched on. Before we jump in, obviously this is a space that's needed. It's a gap in the industry. Are you seeing a lot of players enter the space that you're in right now? Is it a fairly competitive landscape?
I would say so. I'm starting to see more players delve into pieces that we do. I think one example I've seen recently is a lot of new entrants into the market for inspection-related offerings and solutions. Right. Where for Fleetio, inspections is one piece of what we do. So we're starting to see that folks are picking up pieces of our value chain and saying, this is something we want to focus on. And then there's a lot of, long-lasting competitors that we've been up against for a while that have been doing this for quite a long time. So overall, I think just hard asset management and the introduction of AI and new technologies does make it a pretty competitive space overall, yes.
Absolutely. And I think as we get into this new tech and this AI, it becomes even more important to be on top of things. And it's really why I love the work that you're doing. And I'll leave a link down below, obviously in the podcast notes, for the work that you are doing. If anyone wants to check it out, highly recommend that you do. But it's great to see a company really on that forefront, that front line, not afraid to take chances and innovate. And I really like that you guys are doing that. So listen, I appreciate the time today and looking forward to this conversation, and I appreciate that little bit of context for the audience. So let's start right at the top. Now, you mentioned we have a lot of data coming in, and it's a challenge in itself. What are the most common data challenges that you see fleet operators being faced with these days, specifically when we're talking about vehicle identification, tire maintenance, tire management, and I guess vehicle management as well?
Yeah, sure. And I think the folks that are going to gain the most from a conversation like this aren't the folks that have a super refined set of data processes already, or all the engineering and analytics resources in the world. So I'm going to try to maybe frame some of my thinking and responses around the folks that are just starting their journey, maybe haven't started it just yet. Okay. And I think one of the most common and fundamental challenges I see is lack of data in the first place. Right? A lot of times I see a motivated and relatively digitized front office. Maybe they're operating out of their ERP system, spreadsheets, maybe the accounting and finance team is in QuickBooks Online, whatever it might be, but they're motivated to digitize things, to make decisions using data. And then you will have maybe folks that are in the field or in the shop that are still using paper. Maybe they're just starting to use a Google Sheets or something like that. I think I see a lot of the mechanic and technician persona really still adopting paper as probably one of Fleetio or Anyline's biggest competitors, right? So I think there is kind of a tug of war between the front office and the folks that are executing on these things. And these pieces of paper that are tracking actually expensive activity sometimes never even make its way into any of these systems that the front office is using. So it really, you kind of have your hands tied behind your back. You're producing all of this paper-related activity and data, but you can't do anything with it. So I'd say that's the biggest challenge. One is there is no structured data to use. I think the second big challenge as it relates to fleet operations, I'd say the folks that are taking steps to be less reactive and to digitize their fleet operations is the lack of a single source of truth. So if you could imagine, all right, you finally got the folks in the shop to start at least tracking things, let's say in Google Sheets for every time they create a work order or what have you. Maybe they're using a work order tool. All right, well, there's an ERP system in the front office that really needs to track all the costs associated with the human and parts resources that are being used in the back there. So when you need to make purchasing decisions on the finance or procurement side, you've got to go talk to guys that are in the shop or in the field and say, hey, where can I go to get this information? How do I get it into my system? So you're kind of having all of this fleet activity and all this fleet data that is all over the place in disparate sources. So even if you are taking those steps, having it in a disorganized and unstructured way in one place, I think makes decision-making certainly less efficient. You have to go to so many more places to get it. And again, if you are some of those folks in the front office, you might know how clean is that data? How structured is it? Should I trust this to make decisions with? So lack of it in the first place, and then no consolidated source of trustworthy truth, I think, is another big fundamental challenge for the folks I'm speaking with.
Is that then just a progressive learning curve, that whole trust element in the data? Because I completely agree. I think collecting it is one thing, but being able to make big business decisions, important life-saving decisions for your drivers based on the data you're getting, to be able to trust that seems like a far step forward for those maybe that aren't even collecting it in the first place. Is it a really big gap, or is that something you just work towards?
I think the journey to data integrity it's like an ongoing principle. You've got to continue to trust it, and I don't think anyone ever gets it perfect. I think anytime you're introducing a new data source, there's going to be a period of time where you're kind of vetting it. You're looking for anomalies, and you're almost trying to find that it's wrong in some ways. In the beginning of some of these folks that are just starting to digitize their operations, or be a little less reactive in their fleet ops, I think that's a new muscle that they haven't really seen yet. And I think probably one of the most important parts is to just trust the process and don't stop. If you find that, hey, I don't really trust this inspections data that I'm getting, take some time to figure out where is it coming from? How does it actually get into this system? Is it transcribed by paper manually? What are some things we can do to get yourself to trust it? And I think it's really about removing error-prone manual data entry, which is 6 ways to Sunday, kind of the biggest thing you always lead yourself back into is how do I remove manual data entry so that I can trust this body of data and make decisions with it.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. I think removing that manual process, we are making errors just by nature, whether it's just the repetition, it's the fatigue, it could be any number of things, but there's too many things that lead to a single error, and that single error just has residual effects down that process line. And I think that's really well said. You have to trust it and just continue to understand it. So I think that's a great point. Now, you mentioned earlier on a lot of fragmentation in the data. You mentioned the paper and pen processes, which still blows my mind given the amount of tools and where we are with technology, that pen and paper is still a thing, but you're right, it exists in a lot of places. Do you have a real world example of where these things have actually led to a significant problem or a significant inefficiency within a fleet?
Yeah, sure. And I will just quickly touch on one of the things you just mentioned where I think, at Fleetio or even you folks at Anyline, we might take for granted how digitized, how advanced our use of data and technologies are. And as you start to talk to some of our customers, you do take for granted, wow, a lot of these things are manual. They are really using paper. But I say half jokingly a lot, paper is one of our biggest competitors right now. So I would say one of the, I'll try to stay high level with this example because it was a real customer. There's a large logistics company, and they're managing a fleet of delivery trucks. Think of just like last mile delivery, and they really did rely on a lot of paper logs and spreadsheets. I would say like they were at step 1 of their digitization journey. They were just starting. They figured out what Google Sheets was, and like, all right, cool, we could maintain this stuff.
Good.
Opening up on a desktop constantly, right? So. Keep in mind, this was a business that is subject to DOT requirements. So naturally, spreadsheets don't alert you when a vehicle is overdue for maintenance unless you're looking for it, right? So you might have a tab on a spreadsheet that says perform oil change every 2,000 or 3,000 miles. That spreadsheet isn't going to say, hey, mechanic in the shop, you've got to go do this thing now. So it was an example of your tracking, but maybe not executing it very well. Each of the drivers were kind of manually recording mileage or any maintenance they did on the road on these paper forms. They were eventually starting a process where they were taking all of these, thousands of paper forms and adding them into the system so they could at least say, this pre-trip inspection it had no failures today. This pre-trip inspection did have failures, and here's how much it cost to fix them. So it was really quite a large, pretty massive data entry campaign that they were going on to record all this historical information, which that's data entry. There were inconsistencies. There were missing reports. And they found that very rarely was preventative maintenance actually being performed on time, let alone at all in some cases. So they were realizing they really did need to make a change because it was coming quite disastrous. In the midst of all of this, there was an accident, and they were audited, which is kind of worst case scenario for them. Absolutely. So if you think about all of those inputs, like what were the consequences to efficiency, cost, and things like that? Well, one, unexpected breakdowns. Vehicles are breaking down because they're not being maintained properly. When these vehicles are breaking down on the road because they haven't had any preventive maintenance done, what does that mean? You've got to send a tow truck out there. There's emergency repairs that need to be done when you're not close enough to the shop. All of that is expensive and unneeded and avoidable cost. On top of all of that, you have the regulatory fines. Like there are some compliance-related issues where you have to produce, you're obligated to produce, show us these, your preventive maintenance records, show us that you've been doing inspections. Those were things that they weren't in a position to do because they were just disorganized, right? So there was regulatory fines, and then I think the biggest one of all is when you think of just fleet management and fleet softwares, it's a necessary evil to their real business. What do they do for a business? They transport goods to and from their customers, right? They're keeping vehicles on the road is just a function of keeping their business operating. So what happens when vehicles are broke down? Deliveries are late. Sometimes they don't make it there at all. Now your customers are dissatisfied, and your fleet operations has now started to impact your core business, which is unwanted attention on that fleet department. So I would say that's a pretty good, it's a real life example, but I would say it's just a microcosm of things that we see a lot for folks that are maybe not moving as quickly as they should be to get things in order from a data perspective.
You said something that we see a lot. Would the average person be surprised to hear the number of examples that maybe mirror This one, I mean, this sounds quite extreme. There's a lot of gaps and inefficiencies in how things are being done and errors going into the system as far as data collection. Are these more common than we think they are?
Oh, I would say so, certainly, and maybe not as extreme as in this
Yeah,
case being audited because of an accident
of
or
course.
what
Yeah,
have
that's an
you. But
extreme.
yeah, the act of realizing a change has to be made, realizing really kind of getting a baseline audit is what state of disarray is my organization in, and then figuring that out and saying, hey, we're going to have to spend some hours and time in the shop getting all this information transcribed. I think folks might be surprised that they're not unique in the sense that if they're just starting this journey, it seems daunting, but stay the course. It'll be worthwhile in the end. Trust me.
Yeah, that's comforting. I think maybe for a lot of those relatable facts, and I think many of those listening will maybe be able to pick out elements of their operations that you've touched on and relate to that. And I think stay the course is a really nice testament to keep that confidence high, trust the process, but continue on that journey. I think of all the things, don't abandon it because maybe something's a little bit more difficult. Stay on course and keep pushing forward, right?
Sure. I mean, think of all of these folks are not software engineers by trade, right? That's not what they want to be the best at. If you're in a fleet department, you want to be really good at fleet management. So think of any other process that you might have implemented over the course of time that has made things better. That's no different than implementing some new digital strategies or finding new ways to implement new softwares into your processes. It's part of the game, like you've been doing in years past.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the challenges that's perhaps underappreciated, and it's kind of the next thing I want to discuss, is adoption to new technologies, change management as a whole, especially when we see the generational gap that's in the fleet industry and in automotive, kind of in general, in that respect. That ability to adopt new technologies and adopt change. What are the key reasons that still exists? And I guess a follow-up to that, how can leadership affect that? How can they push change forward?
Sure. I think that is, you hit the nail on the head with one of the most underappreciated parts of all of this. And I think that when I'm thinking of key reasons that lead to resistance to adopting new processes or technology, there's kind of two big buckets of key reasons. I think one is just the resistance to change in general, human reaction to change. And I think the second big bucket is the resistance to the digital tool or process itself. So one is just, I think, more the human psyche, and I think one is product related. And touching on the first one first, of just like what are key reasons that come to mind for this resistance to change, I think one of the things I'm hearing a lot of is just fear of job security and control. If you think a lot of these seasoned fleet professionals, they worry that digital tools and specifically automation of repetitive tasks might take their job, right? Sure. That's a real fear. It's a valid fear. Yeah. And by relying on the digital tool to make decisions for you, there's another real fear that it just won't be as reliable. It might have glitches. This is someone who has trusted their intuition and hands-on experience for potentially decades. They know if they use this wrench in this way, this is going to happen. Man, if this tool tells me something different and it's not right, now I look bad and I didn't want to use the tool to begin with. So the control and job security fear, I think, is a big one I hear a lot of. The other one that's kind of coincides with that is like the perceived surveillance and micromanagement. When you're thinking of GPS devices in vehicles, automated reporting tools that can show you you're logged into this work order for X amount of time or what have you, it can make workers feel like they're being constantly monitored and potentially just lead to concerns about privacy and trust. I think that's the introduction of new technologies in general that one has to do with. And I think all of it within this first bucket comes back to sort of just an old school mindset. If you look at the demographic of folks within the driver or the mechanic persona, they've been doing this for a while. They've spent decades, again, relying on hands-on experience, their intuition and manual processes that they're very comfortable with. So beyond viewing digital tools as unnecessary, they may even view it as a sign of distrust in their expertise. So I think those are kind of three things that fall within the bucket of just resistance to change. A lot of things are happening quickly. I don't really like it. Then there's the product side of it, right? Complexity and usability issues. Is the tool that is being forced on you too complicated? Is it poorly designed? Does it require really significant training that folks, say this is more of a burden than a benefit? I can't see the light at the end of the tunnel of when I'm going to be able to use this and see efficiency gains. And I think the second, probably one of the biggest ones within this bucket to round it out, is lack of proper training and support for whatever that tool is, whatever the new process is, whatever the new tool is. If companies are rolling out digital tools or just processes in general without clear training, workers feel frustrated and abandoned, and that's what leads to resistance. And this really is like a chicken or the egg paradox with the usability one I mentioned before, because was that tool really unusable? Was it poorly designed? Or was this introduced in a very poor way? Was the process designed in a poor way to where we never really gave your team a fair shot of adopting it? So I think those are big key reasons as to why you're seeing resistance to adopting new tools, processes, and technology. And I think that how do leaders, to the question of how might leaders combat this and address this so that it's just smoother rollout going forward, I think there is probably a best practice, two of them. One is to just think big but start small. Let's not try to overhaul your entire fleet operations today. Can we just start doing digital inspections? Like, can we just do that? Can we just start recording work on work orders digitally? Can we even just do spreadsheets for now? Piece by piece, and then slowly but surely bring in this process and digitize this process. I think that's a good one. Prove to yourself and your team, can you do it one time? And then you do it again and again. That's one piece. But I think an even more probably critical best practice is something that's not just applicable to fleet management, but I think change management in general. And it's really leaning into the 4 stages of the change curve, where you're in stage 1, here's our status quo. It's what we're doing today, where everyone's comfortable, nothing's changing. All right, now we're coming into stage 2, it's a zone of disruption. You've interjected this new tool into my life. You're gonna see a decrease in performance. All those fears of job security and those anxieties are starting to come in. You move into stage 3. All right, we have kind of the zone of adoption. I'm not fighting it anymore. And then the 4th one is the zone of better performance. Now we're actually seeing efficiency gains from these things. And if you recognize where your team is in those 4 stages as you're bringing in new tools or processes and getting to that 4th stage as quickly as possible, I think everyone wins. But really, the zone of disruption, I think, is the most important thing for all leaders to focus on. And that is really where you're articulating what the change is. You are being very clear about what it is and also what it's not. And you're addressing head on all those fears and anxieties. You think that this is going to take your job. Here's why it's not going to take your job. You think that we're micromanaging you or trying to watch what you're doing all day. That's not what it is, and here's why. So if you could usher your team through those stages as quickly as possible, and also don't disregard some of those fears that you might perceive to be silly. Those are all real human reactions to change. So I think that's the biggest thing you could do. Usher your team through those 4 stages and recognizing what those fears and anxieties are. And I think the whole team wins. You'll move much more quickly.
Yeah, and I think communicating it in as clear and transparent of a way as possible, as you said, to keep everyone on board. And perhaps that's easier said than done, especially in large organizations where maybe departments are a bit more siloed and a bit more closed door. What do you say to those organizations when maybe having that transparent, clear, open door communication throughout a change process isn't as easy as everyone in one room?
Oh, that's a challenge, right? There's no good answer for it, but I would say something I was mentioning at the top of the call is that when it comes to data integrity or just adopting a tool that's as cross-functional as a Fleetio or another fleet management software, it's a team sport. You need to break down those silos, right? You have to understand the team that's performing these inspections, as a random example on vehicles, cannot be in a silo and not be giving visibility to how that actually happens in the field. Where does this data come from? Everyone needs to understand what is going on. So I think that's also a part of it. Like, does your organization, does your company not just have the appetite, but is it is it organizationally prepared to accept change to this degree? And those are examples of where you might need to escalate things to, senior executive leadership. Hey, we're really having challenges from an organizational org chart perspective, and it's not the technology, it's not the folks in the field, it's not me. There's siloed places to where we can't break into, which is again not really even a fleet management blocker. That's just something that's tough for any organizations.
Yeah, I think being the project manager that's managing that change, I think you touched on all the right points. How important is it having that executive buy-in towards change? Is it essential when you're working with an organization? Do you target having that executive buy-in? Is that something that is non-negotiable these days?
I think so, depending on the size of the organization.
Yeah, of
But
course.
I'd say my overarching answer would be yes. It's always good for any large project to have your executive sponsor, and it's a lot of times someone on the finance team or the senior leadership of operations. But usually the finance team is leading into the discussions of, why don't we know how many vehicles we need next year? Why did we spend more on maintenance, 3x what we did last year with a fleet of the same size? And we can't answer those questions, so we need to be able to answer those questions. So they kind of help lead those things in. So I do a lot of times actually see that the executive leadership is who introduces this and then passes the project off to someone. But like any good project management, you've got to have, when you're mapping all this out, make sure you have all the right decisions makers and all the right people in the room, so to speak, and not physically in the room, but do you have all the people that this system or this process is going to touch bought into this? Are they aware what's going on? I think some folks will go potentially, buy the new software or do this thing, and they start rolling it out and they realize halfway through, man, our customer support really needs to know about this because they don't even have access to this tool or what have you. So having an executive sponsor is great, but then the second layer of making sure all the right decision makers are there to help you make decisions, make it a team sport. Otherwise, it's going to fail.
I love that as a prime takeaway. I think it's super essential. I want to jump back just before we go forward to the next topic. There's one element that I had come up in another conversation. I'd love your input on it as far as a challenge within this change management. And then I'd love to hear how you think that can be navigated. And you alluded to it a little bit there with that trust factor, but it's the fear of accountability within fleet, I think. And you touched on it with drivers who know what they're doing and know how to check things, and they don't want to be told how to do something. And having that GPS tracking as a great example, but the fear of accountability when it comes to pre-trip inspections or driving itself or checks throughout a journey. How does that manage itself within this process, this transition?
Yeah, that one is challenging, right? Mm-hmm. Because when you're thinking of just the word accountability, folks are thinking, am I going to get in trouble? Am I going to get a slap on the wrist for this? Mm-hmm. Have I been mailing it in? So I think that there's good actors and there's bad actors. I think that some of the bad actors are, I'm going to get caught doing these things that I shouldn't have been doing. I ought to stop doing them. Mm-hmm. Or the folks that potentially, I think accountability for me, everyone thinks that it's about getting in trouble. I think that it's more about finding really unique opportunities. So one example might be the accountability of having labor time tracking for all of your mechanics digitized. If you're going to start a work order, you clock into it. When you're done, you clock out of it, right? Mm-hmm. So what's that going to give your fleet manager, your team that's looking at this reporting? Who's really efficient at doing jobs? Who's not as efficient? Who's taking a longer time to do the same jobs, for example. And the person that is less efficient or maybe doing oil changes and that take an hour longer than all the other mechanics, they might have this fear of, oh man, they're going to fire me. I'm not good at this. I would view it as, I would ask why. Why is it taking them longer? It's probably not just because they feel like taking longer and they want to look bad. Do they have all the right tools? Have they even been trained to do this job? Is it because they are still doing things on paper and then bringing it into the system? Asking the why, and then accountability is also looking at like the leadership team. Does this person need physically new tools, new wrenches and different things like that? Do they need new training? How have we set them up enough for success? So I think accountability in this sense is kind of kind of like a saloon door. It could either be focused on the bad actors that they know they have not been doing the right thing for a long time and that needs to be corrected, or it could come inward and say, wow, we've kind of set some of these folks up for failure and we need to do better to make sure that they're more efficient. So I think that as long as you're intending to do the right things, digital accountability is only going to help you in the company.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing as a part of that corporate change. It's needed, but I think you're right. It's that buy-in from everyone. It can be a little bit of a tricky maneuver, but with the right thing at heart and managing each individual, like you said, those bad actors and those good actors, I think that's key. It's an opportunity. I 100% agree with you. I think having accountability is a huge opportunity for process optimization. That's why I wanted to bring it up to kind of get your thoughts on that. So I appreciate that insight. So we've centralized our data. The companies have made that transition change. They're going through that process. All that data is centralized. They have that single source of truth. What are the biggest improvements in efficiency that they're going to start to see first? What can they look forward to immediately?
Oh man, I would say the biggest unlock is probably just how much more quickly I think you'll be able to make decisions. As long as you're able to interpret your own data, I think the general access to consolidated fleet data in one place is probably one of the biggest unlocks that you'll find of this whole journey, this whole process. And just more simply put, think of how much time it would take to gather the decisions, the data to make any of the decisions you need from 3 different sources instead of one. And if you're listening to this podcast, think of just decisions you make repetitively, and imagine going to 3 different places for it instead of one, and how many times you would do that over the course of the year. So I think basic time savings is one big piece of it. I can just go to this one place, and not only I can just go to one place, but I think we were talking earlier about the finance, the accounting folks, the folks in the front office. They can all come to one place, so they don't have to ask, Bob, the shop supervisor, hey, where do I go to figure out how much we might have spent on maintenance this year? You always come to this one place. Now that they know it's all in one place, I can trust the data. I might even integrate it to my ERP system, so I don't even have to physically go into that UI anymore. So I think short answer is just consolidated access to that data in one place is going to unlock decision making that's not just for you, but for your whole entire team, and you could do it much more quickly. So I think that is really the basic time saving element. I would think is the biggest unlock. You make decisions more quickly.
Yeah, and I think that comes pretty immediate. I guess looking at this question in a different way, long-term versus short-term wins, what are the realistic expectations for, there's a lot of work to get this data in. It's a lot of work to get this data consolidated and to have it be visually appealing so you can make these decisions. But setting those realistic expectations for companies maybe currently in that process, what things will just take time and how should they approach that?
Yeah, there's all the change management stuff that we mentioned. You might have this consolidated source of data, but you might have some outliers or some folks that haven't adopted it yet. That's one piece of it that we already touched on. I think it sort of depends on what your goals are, and I do think this is a big part of folks that are starting this journey to kind of improve their operations. As I was mentioning earlier, kind of like think big but start small. What are your goals, and what do you really want to fix with this first? Just generally saying, hey, I want to be more efficient at fleet operations. I want a more digitized operation. I would say overall that's not good enough. That's a great mantra. That's a good theme. But start to think about, what do you want to fix first? And let's just imagine, hey, I want on-time compliance of my preventive maintenance schedules to be above 70%, or whatever your metric is. I want to be better at resolving preventive maintenance events more regularly. Okay, we start there. Now, you might not have an immediate cost reduction. I think in some cases you might actually find that you finding the baseline, I think, of where you should be and having a really informed opinion of whether you're performing well or not so well is something that takes time, because as you've gotten all of this information into the system, all right, I'm resolving my preventive maintenance tasks more on time, more regularly, that's great. Your finance team might see, all right, you're spending more money. Why are you spending more money right now? Well, it's because we weren't even doing it in the first place last time. So it's really easy to not spend a lot on maintenance when you're not doing it, right? So I think kind of to summarize, getting to the point where you have enough data and you're catching your stride to the degree you could say, all right, we are definitely spending too much money on maintenance now. We've done this for 2 years. We resolve all of our reminders on time very regularly. It's pretty crisp. And our fleet size is staying flat. Our costs are going up. Why is that? But now you have an informed opinion of what your baseline is, and you could really start to make cost reduction decisions and projects. So I think that's the big one, getting to the point to where you have the data to have a really informed opinion. Are we doing well? Or are we doing not so well versus just accruing the data to begin with?
Yeah, and that leans really well into the last point I want to bring up. Obviously, it's in the title of the show. AI plays a huge role when it comes to how a lot of this information is realized and actualized and then used in the decision-making process. How have you seen AI implemented to make those big impacts? Is it the predictive maintenance side? Is it that decision-making side? It's undeniable the role it's playing, but where are you seeing it make the biggest impact?
I think where I'm seeing it, and it's evolving really quickly, but where I'm seeing a lot of the impact coming really is on probably the predictive maintenance side. And I would say that I have a biased opinion. My feature area as a product manager at Fleetio is the fleet maintenance stuff, so that's what I'm focused on all day long. But I would say it's really the predictive maintenance stuff. And I would say a simple example, one of my colleagues, Wes, he owns all of integrations, product manager at Fleetio, and we've found that there's some really, really interesting stuff that these telematics devices are producing. And there are some things that you don't have to be an ASE certified mechanic or a seasoned vet to figure out. So we were finding things like, hey, if your car is running all day long and your charge is going down, maybe your alternator isn't working. There's some pretty basic things that you could do. So hey, if I start to see this happen, I'm going to predict an alternator failure. Let's do something with that. Let's replace it. Is it a new battery? Is it things like that? So that's a super basic example of just, hey, this thing should be doing this and it's doing this. Let's make a decision before this becomes a breakdown on the side of the road. But I think that there's kind of like that's the big one, is really I think predictive maintenance. But there is sort of I think there's some prerequisites to it, right? If it's definitely like if you're just starting off this journey to improve your operations and digitize things, you're at the 101 or the 202. I'd say like when you're getting into AI and predictive models and things like that, you're now in the upperclassmen classes. It's a little bit more advanced, but one simple thing I think folks can do to lay a foundation is just lean into install telematics devices on your vehicles, or try to find ways to at least gain access to maybe the OEM installed telematics devices that were done at manufacturing. All of these vehicles produce a ton of interesting data that you could feed to AI models and machine learning models to make decisions with. Even if it's a year, 2 years down the road to where you're actually ready to do something like that or look at interpreting that data, if these vehicles are producing all of this data in the background for that 2-year period and it's yours, you own it, you can now feed it to something in the future. So I would say that's a good first step to start if you're not sure what to do. Lay the foundation and find ways to accrue the data that are being produced from these vehicles.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the models that exist and the solutions that exist that have AI sort of built into, it really simplifies a lot of what people are looking at, and it allows, again, even if you're not using it now, it's bringing a lot of points together, all these data points from a vehicle with the pre-installed telematics, as you mentioned, the aftermarket as well. It's giving us the ability to see things in a much simpler light, and anyone can sort of use that to make decisions or automate maybe more basic decisions. Are you seeing that side of it as well, AI assisting the decision-making process? We talked about that a little bit earlier on.
Yeah, actually, what I'm seeing more of in like AI automating the decision-making process is I have been actually surprised at how often folks in the fleet space are adopting AI in general. Like I would say like ChatGPT as an example, or Claude, or some of these other, web browsers that could be, things you could access through your web browser to ask it questions and make decisions with. Yep. An example might be, hey, I'm thinking about buying a fleet management software. What are some of the top 5 out there? All right, so you didn't just spend all day scrolling through Google. You got this thing, and it'll tell you why. So there's little things that I think are where AI is starting to just work its way into people's life to make general decisions around fleet management. I would say overall, yeah, that piece of it is happening. It's the piece that's happening more slowly, which I'm unsurprised by because it's new and it's complex, is how do that transition from I'm producing all of this data that's plentiful enough to feed to an AI model to coupling it to an AI model. It's a very advanced activity for, I think, any organization that doesn't have in-house engineering or development resources. So I'd say there's the one thing that's happening more quickly than I thought, which is adoption of using GPTs or other services like that. And then there's the thing that's happening about as slowly as I would have expected, which is wiring up your vehicle data or any data to predictive models and then having it tell you instead of you going to an AI model to ask it explicit pointed questions.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get there. I mean, like you said, this is evolving incredibly quickly. And I think where we are today is not where we expected to be maybe a year ago. So this will just continue to evolve and plugged into solutions like yours and other management software. I think it's just going to be more and more powerful and give everyone a bit more ability down the line, which is ultimately what we want. Everyone wants that increased efficiency as, wherever the economy goes, whatever challenges are faced, we're going to need increased efficiency. And all these models and all these bits of technology are there to help and eliminate those inefficiencies.
Of course, it's your friend. It might seem a little, scary or daunting at first, but it really is your friend. Well, again, whether you're someone who thinks, man, is AI going to take my job away? There's a lot of real fear in the trucking industry. Man, the self-driving trucks, it's going to eliminate all drivers. Well, these long-haul trucks that might be, driving themselves without a driver, there needs to be someone that can come in and intercept remotely down the road if something were to go wrong or something like that. All right, so it might be -1 driver in the market, but it's +1 for, a remote truck operator. And who is most, well positioned to be a remote truck operator? Maybe some of the drivers that have been doing this for years. So some things are scary. There's different fears like that, but ultimately it's your friend. It's made me a lot more efficient in my day to day, and I'm optimistic it would for anyone that's listening to this.
I completely agree. It's worked its way into many of our lives in different ways, and it will undoubtedly have a positive impact when we look at fleet processes and efficiencies down the line. And I think, like you said earlier on, start small, but start. And I think that's super key. Don't be afraid of it because it seems like a big task. Just knock one stair down at a time, right? Build that foundation and just work that step one by one. I think that's such a key. I love that takeaway as well that you mentioned. I think that's eliminates that overwhelming fear that a lot of people have. And surely, I guess that's how you start a lot of your conversations as well.
Oh, most definitely. I think it's really big to start small, because if you could show, again, yourself and your team, hey, we could do this once. Like, can I do this one? It's riding a bike. Some folks I'm going to learn how to wheelie first. Just ride the bike. Can you ride this bike down the sidewalk? Okay, cool. I can ride a bike. Maybe I'll try a motorcycle next. Do little things that help you gain muscle memory and say, all right, not everything that's new is scary or a failure. If you could do it once, do it twice, change starts to work its way into your life. It becomes a culture for your organization too. So that's a big one. Think big, start small. Yeah,
brilliant point. And it gets more people on board, and maybe it reduces some of that fear of change as well. Getting those little wins gets more people involved. So it really has a positive impact. So listen, Chuck, this has been fantastic. I could probably talk to you for another hour and not get bored at all. I really appreciate the insights today. Plenty of takeaways for the audience. Before we wrap up this episode, any final points from your end? Anything that you wanted to mention before we close?
Well, first off, thanks, Mark. This has been awesome. And just for any of the listeners out there, one of the points that Mark and I touched on in the past is if you're thinking, man, we have a lot of work to do. I feel like we're way behind or what have you. Just remember, you're not unique in this sense. You may be surprised how ununique your organization is. So stay the course, and may not pay dividends this quarter or even next quarter, but long term it will be beneficial. You will win. So just keep it in mind and stay the course.
Yeah. Perfect final note. Listen, I appreciate the talk. And again, thank you for the insights today. Wishing you and your team a great year ahead. Keep doing what you're doing. I think it's fantastic. And I really appreciate the talk. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Have a good one.
All right. And for everyone watching and listening to this episode of the Auto Tech Show, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully plenty for you to take away and think a little bit more differently about Don't fear where you are in that journey. If you have questions or comments, or maybe you just want some insights, don't hesitate to reach out to either myself or Chuck. Head down to the podcast notes. You'll see links for both of us there. Please reach out, ask questions. That's where a lot of these conversations start. If you just want a pulse check of where you're at, maybe you heard something today that's relatable and you want a little bit more information on, please do head down there, click those links and reach out. We'd appreciate that. As well as a lot of other resources down there to check out what Fleetio is doing. Definitely recommend that you head down there and click that as well. But with that, we'll bring this episode to a close. Thank you all again so very much for listening and watching this episode. It's been great to have you. We'll see you on the next episode of the Auto Tech Show very soon. Bye for now.